Good morning and welcome to our morning devotional, Virtual Bread. I'm Pastor Keith and I'm pleased to be with you this morning. You may be feeling at this point, 3 or 4 weeks into isolation, very lonely. You may be feeling like, does anybody understand this loneliness? Can anybody relate to this? And maybe you feel like many people just don't relate to what you're going through. And who can we turn to in that time? And I would say we can turn to Jesus. And we find in the Bible that Jesus was actually feeling many of the same things that we're feeling in regard to isolation and loneliness. In fact, Isaiah 53 says this about him: "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows." I'm struck there by the phrase, "as one whom men hide their faces." And, in this time we go around and our faces are behind masks, and we're isolated in our homes where we can't see our friends and talk to our friends except through a computer screen. And then, in John, he says to his disciples, "Behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me." I'm struck again by the words that will be scattered each to his own home. And that is kind of what we're feeling right now. And then we see, as he approaches the crucifixion, he goes and he prays in the garden. And he says, in Mark chapter 14, in verse 32, it says this: "And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I pray.' And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, 'My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch.' And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed, that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, 'Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will.'" And then he came back and he found his disciples asleep. So in this time of need, his friends had deserted him, and more will desert him as he approaches the crucifixion. They will be scattered to their homes. He will be isolated on the cross. And I think as we come out of Holy Week and Easter, we're very familiar with the physical suffering of Jesus on the cross, especially if we've watched things like the Passion of the Christ. But I think in this passage, we get a sense of Jesus' emotional suffering and the suffering in his soul that he was experiencing during the crucifixion. He's facing impending death, which is going to bring physical pain. He's facing the desertion of his friends, and he's facing, worst of all, the desertion of his Father at this time. And what does Jesus do, though, during this time is he turns to his friends, he lets them know how he's feeling, and then he goes into prayer with the Father. And he turns this over to the Father. He expresses his desire to have this pass over him. And then he says, "But your will be done." And so in this time of isolation, we can turn to Christ as an example of how to deal with what we're going through. We talk to other people about it, and we ultimately pray to the Father and turn our desires and our needs over to God and let him handle this. So I hope this has been refreshing and uplifting for you today. Thanks for joining us.